Something old, something new, something borrowed, something red. We are, of course, at Monza for the Italian Grand Prix, a track that is the perfect marriage between high-speed straights, a few chicanes thrown in, and a couple of really high-speed corners. This track provides a really interesting engineering challenge for every team up and down the grid. And I'm going to start off talking, of course, about McLaren. They're leading the World Championship, both the Constructors and the Drivers' Championship. And I want to start, of course, by talking about what happened in the Netherlands. Yeah, Lando Norris retired near the end of the Grand Prix with an oil leak on his power unit, and Monza is a really power unit intensive circuit. McLaren have had to make an upgrade to the car that you can't see and we don't have any footage of, but it has slightly increased the weight of both McLarens. The oil pipe that failed in Zandvoort has been beefed up for the Italian Grand Prix weekend. Lando Norris has taken the power unit he used in Belgium to bolt into the back of the car for Monza, and I think that was always the plan, so he shouldn't lose out too much at this point of the season, but losing one power unit from the pool could cost him later in the year if both Piastri and Norris plan to go to the end of the year without taking any penalties before the end of the season. That's now going to be a bit of a struggle for the English driver, and it could have real implications for the overall World Championship. But let's get back to Monza and have a look at how the cars are changed to cope with the demands of this very high speed and very different Italian circuit. And I'm going to start off looking at the rear wing of the McLaren. Now, the rear wing is something that pretty much every team is going to come to Monza with a really specialised design for, and you can see that pretty clearly on the Papaya car here. They've just really trimmed it out, gone for a pretty low angle of attack, and it's all about generating a bit of downforce for those corners and the chicanes, but really about reducing drag and trying to balance top speed, which is a problem for the McLarens, against cornering performance. And you'll see different teams taking different approaches up and down the pit lane, and we're going to come back to that in a moment. Another area of the car you're going to see everybody mucking about with, everybody changing, is the front wing. McLaren actually have two different options of front wing, and the area to look at on the different options is this upper element. This is the higher downforce element that they used in free practice on one car, but they could swap around between another design that had a slightly thinner upper element. So it's, again, that balance between getting that cornering performance but not giving away too much top speed. And then the final part of the cars that everybody is really changing is the lower beam wing. I just like this angle here because it really shows some of the gubbins at the back of the car quite nicely. And you can see here the lower beam wing, just a single element lower beam wing rather than the twin element that you're allowed to run. And you can actually see on the interface of the rear wing end plates where they've actually removed the upper mounting and just blanked it off for this race. That's again all about reducing drag and increasing the top speed of the car around the circuit. But to hear a little bit more about those changes and how McLaren have managed them, Anna Francis was down at the McLaren pit garage earlier on.
So coming to a unique circuit like Monza, the characteristics are quite different to other circuits on the calendar. Long straights and extremely fast corners. So we have an evolution of our front wing here this weekend and a bespoke circuit-specific rear wing.
Will both cars be running the new parts, and how long have the new parts been on the drawing board for?
So both cars will be running to the same specification, and some of the front wing options will be tested through free practice. The project to prepare for Monza starts many months ago with understanding of where the car needs to be at a circuit like this, and the project to design and manufacture a bespoke rear wing like this takes around 6 weeks.
We've previously seen the team introduce new parts during a practice session and then opt not to run them in the race, like in Saudi Arabia. Could you perhaps give us an insight into this approach?
So often we use free practice sessions for evolution and understanding. Learning is a very important concept in Formula One, and that might be evaluation for that event, or it might be evaluation for a later event. It's really important that the evolutionary understanding is happening all the time. We learn every time we run the car. How we deploy is linked to that learning.
It's actually quite interesting what McLaren are doing at Monza this weekend, because it's a complete departure from what they've been doing all season. In other races, McLaren have introduced new parts, tested them out in free practice, taken them off the car and gone through qualifying and the race with an older specification part, while they go away and have a nice long think about the upgraded components, try to understand how they influence the rest of the airflow around the car before reintroducing them. Sometimes it's just the next race they reappear, sometimes it's 3 or 4 or even 5 races before you see that part actually used in competition. I think a wing tried out in the Spanish Grand Prix weekend actually made its race debut at the Dutch Grand Prix last week. So it's a pretty unusual upgrade schedule, but it does really seem to work for McLaren, and I wonder with the new rules next year whether we're going to see a lot more teams taking that more measured approach to car development. Fascinating stuff there, but a team that you cannot ignore when you come to Monza. It's Ferrari, and of course we have to talk about Ferrari. Ferrari have made the changes you sort of expect when you come into Monza, very similar to the changes made at McLaren. A new sort of skinny front wing upper element, we've seen that used up and down the grid. Ferrari going for this option, and it does seem to be working quite nicely. Then around the rear of the car, you can see they've gone for a single element lower beam wing, just like McLaren. Bit more aggressive, I think, the angle of the lower beam wing on the Ferrari compared to the McLaren. And also, I'm quite surprised to see that they've got this much cooling at the rear of the car. Ferrari has got quite a different number of levels of cooling on the rear end of this car, and the more cooling you run on the car, the more drag you develop, essentially. I mean, it's more complicated than that, but that's a good rule of thumb. So Ferrari's still running quite a lot, and with the high average speed of Monza, that's something of a surprise. So maybe the demands of that Ferrari gearbox or the Ferrari power unit mean that they have to run it like that when it's under such strain as it is at Monza. Looking at the rear wing of the Ferrari in use this weekend at Monza, no, this image is not a mistake, but Carlos Sainz hasn't rejoined the Italian team. He remains at Williams. Ferrari has gone and raided the parts bin in Maranello. They've taken last year's Monza specification rear wing and just fitted it to this year's car. You can see very clearly the shape of the wing on the upper element and also the lower element as well. Very skinny, almost like a T-tray. Again, reducing drag, but still giving enough downforce that the cars need to get around the lap with a decent lap time. Now here you see it with last year's stickers on, and here you see it with this year's revised stickers on. There it is, you see, and they've gone for a different sticker and taken off the gurney flap on the top edge of the wing. And that's about it for Ferrari. So they've raided the parts bin for this year's Italian Grand Prix. But why is that? Well, to develop a Monza-specific rear wing is a whole job on its own, and most teams do it for every new car as they're developed, but it's done very early in the season. The effort and aerodynamic research time required to develop this wing, of course, is quite a lot. So Ferrari just said, well, last year's wing was pretty good. Let's just bolt it back onto the car this year and hope for the best. And that allows them to put a little bit more effort into next year's car, because all of that wind tunnel and CFD allocation is, of course, capped. So a little bit of cost saving, a little bit of aerodynamic research time saved for Ferrari as well. And the old wing, well, based on the practice times at least, it does seem to work pretty well. So a good move by Ferrari, and one that a few other teams have opted to go for, not just here at Monza, but up and down the season for different elements. Looking at the Williams team and Alpine, who've actually bought last year's cars and just modified them a bit. But then moving on, a team that has introduced a new component, a new modification this weekend. Here's Kimi Antonelli's Mercedes, and as you can see, Mercedes didn't need to go and raid the parts bin, particularly for George Russell's car, which had been modified both by George Russell and Charles Leclerc at one of the chicanes at Zandvoort. Well, that floor went in the bin, but it didn't really matter because Mercedes had a new floor on the way anyway, and they've revised this central section of the floor quite significantly, but all the good stuff is underneath and we don't get to see that, and the team don't like it if we look too closely. So Mercedes taking a little bit of a step, and that's not a Monza specific upgrade, that is an upgrade that the team probably will run to the end of the season, hoping for a bit more performance from this generation of silver arrows. Then let's stay with things Italian, from Kimi Antonelli to Racing Bulls based in Faenza. As we've seen all season long, there's almost no cooling on the engine cover, which is slightly revised this weekend on the Racing Bull. Great result for them last time out on one of the slowest circuits in Formula One. Let's see how they get on one of the fastest circuits. And they have already suffered a few problems. But before we get into that, let's hear from Anna Francis, who is down at the Racing Bull's garage.
We brought some upgrades that are track specific. We have a rear wing for here, and we have a front flap to rebalance it, and we've got some slightly modified mirrors just for this specific track. And then we've got a bigger part of it that is part of the floor and side pods. That is the proper upgrade for the car for the rest of this year. It's basically just an upgrade just to get better downforce, better drag performance for the car, just improve the float structure.
You mentioned you have an updated mirror housing this weekend. How much of a difference to the car do the different mirror designs make? And do you now have mirrors for high downforce and low downforce?
So the change it's a small one, but it's going the right direction, of course, for this track. It's specific for Monza. And it's not high downforce, low downforce. It's really Monza specific, just because how extreme this track is in the season.
Why do you think it is that some teams have moved away from using the elements around the main mirror housing?
I mean, each team will have its own reason. I guess it's a similar reason for us. So yeah, I guess it's the same. It's just efficiency and downforce.
That's interesting to hear then from the team. And the thing that, before I get into what's got me really excited, which is the wing mirrors, and I get ridiculously excited about wing mirrors even on road cars. Don't at me. The floor on the Racing Bulls is brand new. They've changed that. Whether it's a completely different concept or not underneath in the bits we can't see, I'm not sure. But Isaac Hadjar did have a few problems with it in free practice 1. He ran off the road, bashed it onto the gravel and cracked the floor, and they didn't have time to repair it before the end of the session, so they either have to repair it or replace it with an older specification part as he goes through the rest of the weekend. So if you're a young driver and you get a new part on your car, don't break it in the first time out. The team don't really like that. But they have made those changes, and we'll have to see how the Racing Bull gets on for the rest of the weekend. I mentioned wing mirrors because this is the old specification Racing Bull's wing mirror. Now, these mirrors have been around in Formula One for quite a long time. Ferrari were the first team to introduce them after some team members saw a technical paper written by a member of the engineering faculty at the University of Miami. That paper highlighted a way to reduce the aerodynamic drag of the mirror housing by putting it in a sort of surrounded cocoon. In the original version, it actually linked up all the way around, and you had a mirror housing around the mirror housing. That seemed to reduce the aerodynamic drag of the mirrors overall. Over the years, pretty much every team adopted this approach, but as things have developed, as studies on the mirrors have evolved over the years, more and more teams have actually dropped this approach altogether. And you heard from talking to Anna that some teams don't like it anymore, but they all have their own approaches. Racing Bulls have still been one of those teams who've retained most of that external housing. But coming into Monza, you can see they've dropped the lower element of that housing altogether and ended up using just a couple of small elements linking that top section to the main housing. The housing itself has also been reshaped quite significantly. I like to call this the dangle barn design of mirror, just because it reminds me of an obscure German train. You can see the shape of the aerodynamic element above the main mirror housing, and that is critical, and that is all to do with the flow downstream of the mirror housing as the team try to minimise the losses created by the rear view mirrors, but also use them in a way that benefits the airflow rearward of the car. Now you'll notice these two vertical elements on the upper section of the bodywork. I'm not sure what you'd call vertical elements on the upper section of the bodywork other than sticky uppy bits. When you get to look at this mirror from a few different angles, you can really start to see how it's beginning to interface with the rest of the airflow around the car. And when we look at it from the rear, it's really, really clear. Look at this. You can see that the actual main mirror support is designed to work in union with these two sticky uppy bits and work with that airflow around the rear of the car, which is quite an important area. Then also the main mirror support coming this way clearly has an aerodynamic function as well. It's not just about keeping the mirror from falling off the car, which does sometimes happen in Formula One. However, this is just an area of engineering design where Formula One is kind of unique, because engineers have poured so much design and energy into optimizing rear view mirrors, and it sounds ridiculous, it sounds completely pointless. But go outside and have a look at a few road cars, because you'll start to notice a lot of car manufacturers have also spent a huge amount of time designing and optimizing the shape of their rear view mirrors. Why have they done that? Because it reduces aerodynamic drag, and that for you on the road will save fuel. But for racing bulls at Monza, it'll give them a better top speed. And that's what the Italian Grand Prix is all about, isn't it? Top speeds, those long straights, reducing drag, and the winner, well, we'll decide who that is on Sunday.